Earlier, I used to think that the more love you shower on someone, the more attention you give, and the more you cater to all their desires, the more the woman in your life would appreciate you. But now I see it differently. I've come to realize that all those gestures might just make her take you for granted. It can give her the impression that she can do whatever she pleases, knowing you'll either ignore it or make excuses for her. Back in freshman year, I met Megan. We started dating, and for that first year, we were on again, off again. We seemed to like each other well enough, and the physical part of our relationship was good, but neither of us was ready to commit. Then in our senior year, we reconnected. This time, we stayed together, and 6 months after graduating, we tied the knot. Soon after our wedding, my parents celebrated their 25th anniversary, and during the party, I found my dad standing off by himself. I asked him how he and Mom managed to stay happy for all those years. I pointed to a few couples we knew who couldn't seem to go a week without some kind of argument. "How do you and Mom avoid that?" I asked. He smiled and said, "The secret, son, is to remind them every day that you love them. Show it in little ways, and never let a day go by where you assume they know it. Keep showing it every single day." I really took that advice to heart. For the next 7 years, I never missed a chance to tell Megan I loved her. No birthday or anniversary went by without something special. I even kept a list of unique anniversaries to celebrate. I sent her flowers on the anniversary of her first time cooking meatloaf, or when she used our new washer and dryer for the first time. I gave her a card on the anniversary of her first promotion at work. No occasion was too small for me to recognize. She got flowers and chocolates on the anniversary of the first time we were intimate, and diamond earrings to celebrate the same moment. I would send flowers to her office just because, with a card that simply said, "I love you." I went all out, following my dad's advice to the letter. What my dad didn't consider was that different women see things differently. While my mom saw these gestures as a sign of constant love, Megan started seeing them as a sign of insecurity, like I was doing all this just to cling to her. Somehow, my attempts to show her love made me seem less valuable in her eyes. But I didn't realize that at the time. I just went on with life, thinking we had a happy marriage. Both Megan and I were doing well in our careers. We were moving up the corporate ladder, but that came with longer hours, more stress, late nights, and occasional business trips. There were nights where we barely saw each other. Sometimes, I'd come home late to find her already asleep, or vice versa. I figured it was the price we paid for success, and I thought Megan felt the same. When we were together, I tried to make up for the time we were apart. The sex was incredible, and there were weekends where we didn't even bother getting dressed. Megan would smile and tell me I was her forever, and I believed her. Everything came crashing down at a Halloween party thrown by her company. The event was held at a fancy hotel downtown. They rented out a ballroom and several guest suites for the occasion. The party was on a Wednesday night, and I told Megan I'd meet her there. It started at 7, but I had a client to see off on an 8 p.m. flight, so I told her I'd arrive around 8:30. At the last minute, my client decided to extend their stay, so I ended up getting to the party at 7:30. As soon as I walked into the ballroom, I saw Megan with a man I didn't know. At the time, I hadn't met most of her coworkers, so I didn't think much of it. But then I noticed her wrapping her arms around his waist. I headed towards the hallway they disappeared into. It led to 3 separate rooms. I wasn't sure which room they had gone into, so I opened the first door. It was empty. So was the second. Just as I was about to try the third, I heard giggling coming from inside the second room, even though it had looked empty. So I went back inside to investigate more closely. I heard another laugh and realized it was coming from the vent in the ceiling. That's when it hit me. I could hear what was happening in the next room. I started walking toward the door, thinking I'd catch them, when I heard Megan say, "Be careful. You don't want to tear your dress, do you?" "So, how am I supposed to get to what I want with you like this?" "Let me show you," the man said. "Damn, Megan, I'll never get tired of looking at those. Let me taste those beautiful breasts of yours." "Oh no, lover. Not until you bring me my toy. You can't enjoy my charms until I have my fun first." Then I heard the sound of a zipper being pulled up, and Megan said, "Now that's something I'll never get tired of. Are you sure we don't have time for a quickie in one of the rooms? I need you right now. Come on, babe, we just did it during lunch 3 hours ago. You can wait until tomorrow. No, I can't. Well, you'll have to. James said he'd be here by 8:30, and I need to be around when he shows up. If he walks in early and I come out looking like I just had sex, he might get suspicious and start looking into things we don't want him to. Megan, if James is as weak as you say, we could do it right in front of him, and he wouldn't even know. I know, she chuckled. I could just tell him to go home, and we'll talk about it later. I could convince him it was just a joke, and he'd believe me. But just because I could doesn't mean I want to stir up that kind of trouble. Are you sure we can't sneak upstairs for a minute? I don't want to risk it, but I can still help you relax, the man said. There was a pause, and then I heard him groan. Oh God, Megan, your mouth is magic. No one's ever made me feel this good before. The sounds continued for another minute or two until they reached a peak. Dave is going to be furious when I tell him you took care of me, and he has to wait until tomorrow, the man said. Maybe not, Megan teased. I thought you said we couldn't today. I said we couldn't go up to the guest rooms. I didn't say anything about what we just did. How do you manage this? Dave's probably going to show up after James does. What we just did didn't take long, sweetheart. I'll introduce you to James, and then I'll excuse myself to go to the ladies' room. While you're chatting with him, I'll sneak back in here with Dave for a quick round. God, Megan, you're downright wicked. I know, darling. That's why you love me. Now, are you going to rinse your mouth? Or kiss your husband with the taste of another man still on your lips? This isn't the first time James has tasted you. You're such a devil, Megan. That's exactly what you are. Pure trouble. Come on, love. We need to get back to the party. It's amazing how quickly love can turn into hate. In those few minutes, I went from being madly in love to feeling nothing but pure anger. I was torn between two thoughts. Should I kick the door down and make a scene? Or should I hold back, gather more evidence, and make a plan? If I acted now, it'd just become a he-said-you-said mess in court. I could claim I overheard them, but she'd deny it all the way. I needed more solid proof. Besides, if I charged him right now, I'd never know who Dave was, or if there were even more men than just him and the guy in the room. No, I'd still have my moment to confront them, but tonight wasn't going to be it. I hurried out of the building and into the car to cool off. When I finally went back inside, I spotted Megan sitting at a table with two couples and a man. Megan is about 5 feet 8 inches, and the guy next to her looked around 6 feet 1 inch. He had wavy black hair and a thin mustache, which gave him a polished, good-looking appearance. Even before I got to the table, Megan saw me coming. Megan stood up from the table and opened her arms wide to give me a hug. She leaned in to kiss me with that mouth I now despised, but at the last second, I turned my head, letting her kiss me on the cheek instead. I think I'm coming down with something, honey. Don't want to pass it on to you, I said. She nodded in agreement and then introduced me to the people at the table. The good-looking guy was named Sam, and when he stood up to shake my hand, I could tell my guess had been pretty close. I'm around 6 feet 1 inch, and we were almost eye to eye. It was only important because I wanted to know what I'd be up against when it came time to deal with him. We all sat down, and I started making small talk with Megan's colleagues. I noticed the two couples seemed a bit anxious, like they were waiting for something to happen. I danced 2 numbers with Megan, and during the second one, she leaned in and whispered in my ear, "This thing that's making you sick won't stop you from having your way with me tonight, will it? I've been turned on all day just thinking about you." Yeah, no doubt. I thought to myself. I wanted to say, "No, Megan, I don't think so," but I held back. I never called her Megan like Sam had earlier, and I wasn't ready to give her a reason to suspect anything just yet. So, I said, "We'll see how I feel when we get home." She didn't know it yet, but she would never sleep with me again. When the music stopped, we headed back to the table, where another man was now seated, talking with Sam. Megan introduced me to him as Dave. He was around 5 feet 6 inches and maybe 180 pounds. He had soft hands and a weak chin, details I filed away for later. About 10 minutes later, Dave excused himself to visit some people at another table, and I kept an eye on him. I wasn't the least bit surprised when I saw him walk toward the hallway that led to the room Megan had just been in with Sam. It seemed Sam had set it up while Megan and I were on the dance floor. A couple of minutes later, Megan stood up, kissed me on the cheek, and told me she was going to the restroom. Sam waited until she'd walked a few feet away, then asked me what I thought about the Broncos' chances in the Super Bowl. Apparently, Megan had told him I was a football fan, and he used that to distract me while she slipped off to meet Dave. While I talked football with Sam, I kept my eye on the door Dave had gone through. Less than a minute later, Megan slipped in after him. Almost 15 minutes passed before she came back to the table, and I kept chatting with Sam, pretending not to notice how long she'd been gone. When she returned, we danced again, and she pressed up against me. "I'm so horny, baby. Don't let me down tonight," she whispered. We sat back down, and Dave asked Megan to dance. As they moved onto the floor, I noticed one of the women at the table smirk as she looked over at me. The old cliché popped into my mind. The husband is always the last to know. Dave brought Megan back, then Sam took her for another spin. Afterward, she sat down with her boss and talked with him for about 15 minutes. When she finally returned to our table, she whispered in my ear, "Okay, lover. I did what I was supposed to. They saw me dance with everyone. Let's go home. I need you tonight." We had driven separately, so I gave her a head start. I wanted her to be home, undressed, and waiting on the bed by the time I got there. I drove slowly, giving her plenty of time to get ready for what I had planned. When I got home, I rushed upstairs and headed straight to the master bathroom, making a big show of pretending to be sick. I made enough noise in the toilet to sell the act, then splashed some water on my face and wiped my forehead with a damp rag. After drying my face, I walked into the bedroom and saw Megan lying naked on the bed. "Sorry, baby, I don't know what this is, but I'm not going to risk giving it to you. I'll sleep in the guest room tonight and call the doctor in the morning." I could see the anger in her face as I walked out. The next morning, I was already up, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, trying to look as sick as possible when she walked in. I glanced at my watch. The doctor's office doesn't open until 8:30. I should call work and let them know I won't be in today. I reached for the phone while Megan poured herself a cup of coffee and went to get ready for work. "Don't forget, I'll be home late tonight," she said. "We're still working on that budget proposal that's due next Tuesday." "Yeah, sure," I thought, hanging up the phone without actually calling anyone. After she left for work, I got dressed and went to my office to take care of a few things I couldn't leave unattended. I told my secretary I had a doctor's appointment and would be out the rest of the day. Then I headed to the public library. There, I dug through the directories and found the addresses and phone numbers of Sam Woods and Dave Travis. Then, using the library's computers, I pulled up information on the company Megan worked for. I found the names, addresses, and contact details for all the company officers and members of the board of directors. I even looked into the backgrounds of the senior executives and the chairman of the board, trying to get a sense of how they might handle a scandal. I was happy with what I discovered. If I was right, even the slightest hint of a scandal would make Megan and her two lovers throw everything they had into the trash. That evening, I parked near Megan's workplace, and when she left at 10 minutes past 4, I followed her across town. She pulled into a motel parking lot, got out of her car, and walked up to room 131. She knocked, and Dave opened the door, stepping aside to let her in. 20 minutes later, Sam arrived, got out of his car, and walked toward room 131. I could only assume they were there to discuss their budget meeting. I wondered if Megan's company appreciated that their employees were so dedicated they'd work on the budget on their own time, or if someone had the nerve to expense this little rendezvous. I made a note of the make, model, and license plate of Sam's car before driving home. On the way, I thought more about Sam and Dave. Both were married, but I couldn't figure out if their marriages were happy or not. What I did know was that neither of their wives had been at the office Halloween party. I needed to learn more about these guys and maybe find a way to involve them in my plan to expose Megan, Sam, and Dave's affairs. I also started thinking about some things I hadn't noticed before. For example, Megan always worked late on Mondays and Thursdays. I never doubted her when she said Mondays dragged on because they were dealing with all the problems that had piled up over the weekend. And Thursdays? Well, that was when they had to wrap up reports due on Friday. Why did I trust her so easily? Because I was stupidly in love. Only now was I realizing just how naive I had been. I was lying in bed reading when I heard her come home. I turned off the light, set my book aside, and pretended to be asleep. She opened the door to our room, glanced in, and then quietly shut it before heading to her own room. A few minutes later, I heard the shower running. Sleep didn't come easy for me that night. I lay there staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out how to take all three of them down at the same time. It had to be all of them together. I didn't want anyone realizing what was happening to the others and taking steps to protect themselves. It would be swift, and they'd know exactly who was responsible. They'd also know why. Then, as I mulled it over, the answer hit me. I sat up, turned on the light, and picked up the mystery novel I'd been reading. It was about a man who was framed for murder, convicted based on planted evidence, and a lawyer and detective who worked against the clock to prove his innocence before his execution. This will do, I thought, setting the book down and turning off the light. Now that I knew what to do, I slept like a baby. On Friday morning, I told Megan that the doctor had diagnosed me with a stomach flu, but with medication, it should clear up soon. I'm still a little weak, but the doctor says I should be strong enough to go back to work on Monday. He doesn't want me to do much this weekend, just rest. Megan touched my cheek. Rest and get your strength back, my love. You'll need it. I spent a quiet weekend at home, and by Monday morning, I told Megan I was feeling ready to get back to work. I'm still a little weak, I said, but I'll be fine as long as I take it easy. That Monday night, I followed Megan back to the same motel, but this time, it was room 146. Sam met her at the door and let her inside. 5 minutes later, Dave arrived and went in as well. I took down information about Dave's car and drove home. My plan wasn't without risks, but the fact that I was willing to take them showed how much I craved revenge. It wasn't cheap either, but if it worked, it would be the best money I'd ever spent. A few phone calls to friends who knew people in certain circles got me in touch with the right individual. A midnight meeting in a parking lot later, and I had what I needed. By the following Sunday, everything was ready. When Megan left for work that Monday morning, I made my decision. That evening, I followed her again to the motel. When she and her two lovers were in room 136, I got out of the car and walked up to Sam's vehicle. The car was unlocked, so I popped the trunk and stashed half a pound of marijuana behind the spare tire. Dave's car, on the other hand, was locked, so I used the Slim Jim I'd bought to break in. I opened the trunk of Dave's car and stashed a pound of weed inside, then locked it up. I left an ounce of weed on the back bumper to give the police probable cause to search it. I drove half a block away, called the police from a payphone, and reported that there was a drug deal happening in motel room 136. I also gave them the license plate numbers of Megan, Sam, and Dave. When they asked for my name, I quickly said, "No way, man, I'm not getting caught up with a bunch of Colombians," and hung up. I drove to another payphone and called all three local TV stations, giving them the same info I gave the cops. The recent election had brought in a new mayor who ran on a tough war on drugs platform, and I knew the police would respond fast. The news stations knew it too, so I expected they'd show up to capture the story. After driving a block further to a third payphone, I called Sam and Dave's wives, letting them know their husbands were in room 136 at the Seabreeze Motel with a woman. I parked a little ways off, where I could watch without drawing attention. It took the police only 10 minutes to arrive, but they spent another half hour organizing. A couple of patrol cars came first, followed by a SWAT van and two unmarked cars filled with plainclothes detectives. By the time the cops were ready, news crews were already on site, and TV vans were setting up. I watched as two SWAT officers used a battering ram to break down the motel room door, and 4 others stormed in with their guns drawn. God, how I wished I could be a fly on the wall to see Megan's face when that door came crashing in. Just 3 minutes later, they escorted Megan, Dave, and Sam out in handcuffs. Dave and Sam were wearing shorts, but Megan was naked, wrapped in a blanket. I pressed a preset on my phone and called the president of Megan's company. When he answered, I said, "Did you know 3 of your middle managers are running a drug operation out of your office?" I gave him their names and filled him in on what was happening at the Seabreeze, even as we spoke. I made the same call to all 5 board members and then drove home. When the police searched Sam and Dave's cars, they found the weed I had planted and an ounce of cocaine in Megan's purse, which was tucked under the front seat of her car. I couldn't tell if Sam or Dave's wives were in the crowd that had gathered, but I really hoped they were there to witness it all. That night, the story made the 10 o'clock news on channels 2 and 7. I laughed when the Channel 7 anchor said, "Today, Mayor Jones began delivering on his campaign promise as police dismantled a major drug ring operating out of a local motel. No word yet on how many were arrested." They showed footage of the three being let out in cuffs, calling them drug lords. I turned off the TV, shut off my phone, and went to bed with a smile. When Megan called me later, asking if we could mortgage the house to cover her bail, I just laughed. Eventually, she convinced her parents to put up the money. When she got out and came back home, she found all the locks had been changed, and her belongings were stacked in boxes on the driveway. "Why are you doing this to me?" she asked. "Because you're a fallen woman, and I don't want anything to do with you anymore." "But you don't understand. If you just let me explain." "I got all the explanation I needed when I saw you being escorted naked from a motel room on the evening news." I closed the door in her face. I helped her father load her stuff into a U-Haul, but I refused to speak with him about her. Megan called 2 or 3 times a day after that, but I never answered. When she showed up at my office, I had security escort her out. As for Megan, Dave, and Sam, they all lost their jobs. Their company cut ties with them, and they didn't fare well legally either. Despite being first-time offenders, the mayor's hardline stance on drugs meant they weren't given the probation many others received. It didn't help that they kept insisting they were innocent, even after being caught red-handed. Megan made things worse when she demanded a drug test to prove she wasn't using. The test showed she was clean, which only helped the prosecutors argue that the drugs found in her car and purse were for sale, not personal use. In the end, because the mayor wanted quick results from his war on drugs, the 3 of them were offered a deal: 1 year in prison and 2,000 hours of community service. If they behaved, they could get out after 9 months. Their lawyer warned them that they'd be in serious trouble if they didn't take the deal, so they all agreed. While Megan was behind bars, I filed for divorce. Sam's wife and Dave's wife did the same. The 3 of them served their time, and when they got out, I kept a close eye on them. When the moment was right, I went to pay Dave a visit. I later found out that when he arrived at the hospital emergency room, he had 3 broken ribs and a fractured arm. He could have pressed charges against me, but he didn't. Maybe the guilt of what he did was punishment enough. As for Sam and Megan, they ended up living together. One evening, I spotted them leaving a bar. After I finished with Sam, I turned to Megan and said, "Not bad for a weakling, huh? Remember that Halloween party where you and Sam snuck off to the back room? Remember what he said? If he's as weak as you say, we could do this right in front of him, and he wouldn't even notice. Remember that, Megan?" I saw her face change as everything clicked into place, and I laughed. "That's right, Megan. This weakling got his revenge for what you did. Better call an ambulance for your boyfriend. He's not looking too hot." She was still staring at me as I got into my car and drove off. It's strange how revenge can feel so fulfilling in the moment, but leave you hollow afterward. When I exposed Megan's affair, I felt like I'd finally taken back control of my life, like I had won. But after the dust settled, the victory didn't feel as sweet as I expected. Instead, I was left with this gnawing emptiness, a void that seemed to grow each day. At first, the satisfaction of seeing her face when I laid out the proof of her betrayal kept me going. There was no denying the adrenaline rush, the sense of justice served. Megan had lied to me, cheated on me, and now she had to live with the consequences. But as the days went by, that satisfaction faded, replaced by a heavy sense of loss. I lost my wife, the woman I had spent years loving, and with that I lost the future I had imagined. The house felt empty, a shell of what it used to be. Everywhere I looked, there were reminders of the life we had built together. Photos from vacations, her favorite coffee mug, the throw blanket she loved to curl up with on the couch. I couldn't escape her, even though she was gone. At night, I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering how everything had gone so wrong. There was a part of me that still loved her, and that made the pain so much worse. I started to question myself. Was exposing her the right thing to do? Could we have worked through it? I mean, I knew she was wrong, but did I have to go scorched earth? The regret crept in slowly, like a fog. I didn't regret making her face the truth, but I regretted how I'd handled it. I let my anger drive me, and now I was paying for it. I was alone. Friends tried to reach out, offering words of comfort or invitations to get out of the house, but I didn't feel like talking to anyone. What was there to say? That my wife, the woman I thought was my soulmate, had been sleeping with someone else? That I had ruined her life in response? and now felt like my own life was in ruins too. No one really wants to hear that. People want to hear about resilience, about how you're stronger now, how you're moving on. But I wasn't strong. I was broken. I spent hours scrolling through social media, seeing happy couples, engagements, and baby announcements. I hated it, but I couldn't stop myself. I kept wondering, why couldn't that be me? Why did I end up here, alone, while others seemed to have it all figured out? I didn't want to be bitter, but I couldn't help it. I wasn't ready to move on, yet I couldn't stay where I was either. So I did what I always do when things get too overwhelming. I buried myself in work. It was easier to focus on tasks, on deadlines, than to face the mess my life had become. But no matter how much I tried to distract myself, the thoughts crept back in during the quiet moments. I wondered if Megan was suffering as much as I was. Did she regret what she did? Did she miss me? Or was she relieved to be free from the weight of her lies? The anger that had once fueled me turned into something else, grief. I wasn't just grieving the loss of our marriage. I was grieving the loss of the person I used to be. Before the affair, I was confident, optimistic, even a little naive. Now I didn't trust anyone. Every interaction felt tainted with doubt. If Megan could betray me, someone I trusted with my life, how could I ever trust anyone again? 6 months after the divorce, I found myself sitting across from someone new. Her name was Emily, and she was kind, patient, everything you'd want in someone when you're trying to rebuild your life. We met through mutual friends, and it wasn't long before I started to feel a spark, something I hadn't felt in a long time. But as much as I wanted to lean into those feelings, I couldn't shake the fear that came with them. Our dates were light and fun at first. Dinners, movies, long walks through the park. But every time she'd ask me about my past, I'd shut down. I couldn't tell her the full story, not yet. I wasn't ready to let her see just how damaged I was. Trust didn't come easily anymore. Every time she reached out to hold my hand or leaned in for a kiss, a part of me would pull back, afraid of getting too close. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for her to reveal some hidden flaw or secret. In my mind, it wasn't a matter of if, but when. I couldn't shake the suspicion that everyone was capable of betrayal, that even someone as sweet and genuine as Emily could one day hurt me the way Megan had. It wasn't fair to her, but I didn't know how to stop it. My heart had been hardened by what happened, and I didn't know how to let anyone in again. One night, after a particularly great date, we ended up back at my place. Things were going well, better than they had in months, but as soon as we sat down on the couch, I could feel the panic rising. She was saying something about how much fun she had, but all I could hear was the voice in my head telling me to run, to get out before I got hurt again. I didn't want to feel that way, but I couldn't help it. Emily must have sensed something was off because she stopped mid-sentence and looked at me, concern written all over her face. "James, are you okay?" I wanted to lie, to tell her everything was fine, but the words got caught in my throat. Before I knew it, I was spilling everything about Megan, about the affair, about the revenge, and how it had left me feeling hollow. I told her how hard it was for me to trust again, how I was scared that if I let her in, she'd hurt me too. To my surprise, Emily didn't run. She didn't get up and leave, like I half expected her to. Instead, she stayed. She listened. She didn't judge me or try to fix me. She just sat there, letting me talk until I had nothing left to say. And when I was done, she took my hand in hers and said something I hadn't heard in a long time. "It's okay. I'm not going anywhere." In that moment, something shifted. It wasn't a full-on breakthrough, but it was a step. Maybe trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt overnight, but maybe, just maybe, it could be rebuilt over time. Maybe I didn't have to carry the weight of my past into every new relationship. And maybe, just maybe, I could find a way to heal. Thank you for joining us for this touching journey of love, betrayal, and redemption. We hope it resonated with you, even brought a little inspiration. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss any of our upcoming stories. We'd love to hear your thoughts and reactions in the comments. Feel free to share your own experiences or let us know what kinds of stories you'd like to see next. Thanks again for your support. Until then, take care and stay tuned for more great content.